Coming up here, we've got Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com and BangTheBook.com for our Handicapping the Hardwood segment. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
It's going all right. Rough weekend for me in college basketball. It was kind of due probably. I had a really good season thus far, both with my premium plays and the free picks there for the BangTheBook.com daily article. Still been a very good season for both of those. You're going to have those potholes along the way. I hope that, things can turn back around. We'll see what happens. Keep putting in the work. I was happy to finish the NFL season on a good note. 36-24 NFL season. So the game was not exciting last night, but I did have the under, and I'll admit to letting my wife change the channel at some point during the game, but then checking back to make sure everything was okay on the under.
Yeah, and this is one of those things, and I want to mention this real quickly here, that, we talk about the handicapping industry as a long-term business, and people like to jump on and try and ride the hot hand, or, maybe if someone's really having a bad run, they'll hop on them thinking, oh, it's got to turn around, something like that. In small sample sizes, there's a shit ton of variance. It just is what it is. It's the nature of really anything. But when you talk about long-term, Kyle's done this long-term, been very, very good at it from a college basketball standpoint, been very good over the course of the season. So I know some people hopped on here, recently or maybe for the weekend and were a little bit discouraged, but, this is what this business is. I mean, and this is why, you mentioned this on Friday, you try to point people towards the long-term subscriptions instead of, the daily packages that are available. This just is what it is. And, for anybody that's out there that, can't handle the swings or doesn't understand the variance side of it, it's something that you're going to have to deal with and come to an understanding with.
Sure, yeah. I mean, if you can't handle swings back and forth, then you probably shouldn't be doing it, because, I could lose my next 10 plays, whether it be premium or on the article, and that wouldn't necessarily mean that I'm bad at handicapping college basketball. I mean, it's going to happen at some point. I could go 2-10 in the next 12, and does it mean that I suck? No, it doesn't. I mean, it'll look like it from the outside if you take that short-term view at it. But, I've got some really long-term numbers to where I've proven that I have a good edge in college basketball, especially when it comes to totals. And, I've tried to use the first half stuff quite a bit in the free picks because, I've tested out things on first halves and done very well with those, and I'm not able to put those on the sites that I'm on. So, nice to be able to have that as an option. But, yeah, definitely. Don't jump on board thinking it's just going to be free money or anything. I've tried to say as much as I could. I don't know how it will go, in a small sample size, even, just between now and the end of the season. I'll do the best I can do, but certainly don't know how it will go. And I know that I'm a long-term winner at college basketball, and I hope that, people are getting some good insight out of this. It's helping them become better bettors. I know that quite a few people have said that, and that certainly means a lot to me. I know that, some people were upset at how the last few days has gone, and as I told you, I put a ton of time into this too. So it certainly, and I put my money on it as well. So when it comes to, spending a lot of time on things and having some rough days, especially Saturdays. Boy, Saturdays are rough when you have a bad Saturday because I put so much time into it. Friday night, working really late, and then getting back up Saturday morning and doing it again. Those are always tough to take. But, yeah, I mean, I hope everybody's enjoying the article, and I hope everybody's being helped by it in some way. And we'll see if we can keep the good season going.
Well, and as we transition to talking about the Horizon League here, which does come via listener request, so we're going to talk about this low major here today. Keep in mind, I mean, we talk about the importance of sample size. These angles and statistics and trends and things that we talk about on a conference-by-conference basis, I mean, it's not by accident that we're talking about big sample sizes of games because, again, the bigger the sample size, the less variance there is in it, the more actionable this information is. And we've got some pretty decent angles and trends here for the Horizon today.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are pretty strong angles. When we talked about the SoCon, it was really hard to find any good angles. Not the case here in the Horizon League. So put quite a few on here. I'll kind of go through them fairly quickly. But underdogs are 594 and 572 since 2005. Not a strong edge there, but certainly underdogs have had a bit better time of it than favorites. Road teams 604 and 561 ATS in league play. some edge there with road teams. It seems like home court advantage is overvalued a bit here. You got to keep in mind that these Horizon League teams are packed pretty close together. Not many tough road trips here. Road dogs of 11 points or more, 103 and 81, 56% ATS. So if you catch a team on the road getting a bunch of points, it's been a good look. However, that's not going to happen very much in the Horizon League now, especially no dominant team, not too many teams at the bottom that are way worse than everybody else. Cleveland State maybe could be catching 11 points or more some of the time, but in general, it's not going to happen very much. And then, I really like the road revenge angle. I've talked about it in the past. If you look at road revenge long-term in conference play, you've done very well if you lose that first game. It's especially strong game straight up and ATS, and then have to go back on the road. Teams who lost by ATS by 5 points or more in the first meeting, 103 and 78, which is 56.9% in the second meeting when they're on the road. So, they have to lose that first game by 5 points or more against the spread, and then they're 103 and 78 in that next one. That's something to watch for both in the Horizon League and in other leagues. This is certainly a good angle when it comes to college basketball in general.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that, you're not going to find too many double-digit dogs here in this conference. I mean, Valparaiso was, mostly the class of the conference for a while here, but of course they moved on to the Missouri Valley. Northern Kentucky kind of taking over that role now at this point, but, another relative newcomer to the Horizon League. They've only been in this conference for a few years. So, you said a lot of teams that, I think that there's a lot of inconsistency in this conference, both on a year-to-year basis and on a game-by-game basis. So, you're not going to find that angle too much of teams that are laying big numbers, but, with that inconsistency, that's why that's a pretty good angle to play.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's a league that's more wide open than it has been in the past. Northern Kentucky's the best team here, but they're not, a really, really good team. They're an impressive team compared to what you would have thought they would be, but nobody here is way better than everybody else. A couple other ones that I wanted to point out here. First, the bounce-back angle. After losing a league game by 14 points or more, teams are 55% ATS in the next game. And now, if you filter this down to teams with a win percentage of 50 or 42% or better in the bounce-back spot, so you're trying to get rid of the teams that are just really bad. Because, if they're losing by 14 points consistently, they must be really bad. So you take out the teams that are really weak. You get 107 and 61 ATS, which is 63.7% since 2005. Wright State just did this yesterday after getting beaten up the game before. I think this is certainly one to keep an eye on as you go forward. Find the Horizon League, you see somebody get blown out by 15 or 20 points. Probably a good look to try to back them in that next game. It seems like they've been a league where, you don't consistently get beat on like that. So I think the bounce-back angle is a pretty solid one.
I do like that one. I think that's a really good one to keep in mind. Again, 63.7% ATS since 05, sample size of 168 games there. So, again, it also sort of speaks to the fact that, we don't have a lot of blowouts in this league. We don't have a lot of games with double-digit favorites. But when they do happen, there are some very good angles you can look to follow up with in the next game. So that is most definitely something you want to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I think that's one that you can file away or take some notes. If you take some notes while you're listening to this, that's certainly one to make note of. Stat angles. I try to look at what stats were most important in this league. A couple ones here that stand out to me. Teams who shoot 70.5% from the free throw line or better and hold opponents to 41.5% or worse from the floor, meaning field goal percentage defense, are 136 and 108 ATS, so 55.7%. That's not a massive sample size, and I wouldn't say that that's a tremendous angle, but it's something to keep in mind that, if you shoot well from the line and you play good defense in this league, you're going to be pretty solid. Another one here that I really like is I talked about how I think rebounding is more important than most people realize in general, especially whether you can get defensive rebounds. But teams who average 34.5 rebounds per game or more are 88 and 56 ATS, which is 61.1% since the start of 2015. This angle was okay before that time period, but it has really done well since 2015. Now, this is about the time that the rule changes have happened. Now, obviously, rule changes didn't directly impact rebounding, but the fact that there's more fouls, the fact that, the game's played a little bit quicker with a shorter shot clock, I think that could impact this. So I wanted to point that one out because, I really do think rebounding is more important in general than most people think it is when handicapping college basketball. And here in the Horizon League, that's true for sure.
Well, and again, there appears to be some correlation here between what we've already discussed and these last 2 points here. If you shoot well from the free throw line and play good defense in a league where there are a lot of close games, you should be pretty good against the number. If you rebound well and get second chance opportunities or don't give them up, when, again, there are supposed to be a lot of closer games in this conference, you're going to have more success as a rebounding team there too. So a lot of correlation here with these angles, and I think that's very important because we talk about conference specialization and the importance of that. If you want to specialize in the Horizon League, keep these things in mind, these correlated angles where this is a conference where there are a lot of closer games and some of those little edges like free throw shooting, like rebounding can really add up.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're laying 2 points, instead of laying 6 or 7 points and we're expecting a really close game, at the end of that game, if you're knocking down free throws, it makes a big difference. Also, throughout that game, if you're getting defensive rebounds, not giving the other team a second chance, or you're getting second chance points yourself, it's not too hard to cover 2 or 3 points. So, I think we're going to see quite a few spreads in this league to where, we're not seeing -9, -10, -11. We're seeing, a favorite of 3 or 3.5 or 4 points. And I think that these things make a big difference in a league like the Horizon League. So that's something to watch for going forward. Totals. I love totals, so I got to give you a couple of angles here on totals. The over is 595 and 582 since 2005 in the Horizon League, but the under is 82 and 60 in the Horizon League last year and so far this year. And you can go through on KenPom. You can also look at this on Torvik's site. You can see that the efficiency of offenses in the Horizon League has gone down pretty drastically the last couple seasons. You have a lot of teams who are playing quickly, but they just can't shoot very well. So you have totals that are fairly high, but they're consistently going under. That has been proven by totals of 147.5 or higher, 48 and 29 to the under last year and so far this year. So be very hesitant when you see those Horizon League totals of 152, 153 of taking the over in those games, because we've consistently seen that while the pace would suggest that it should be that, efficiency on offense is not good enough to get to that kind of number.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And we've kind of talked about that. We talked about, I believe, with the SoCon. Even some of those games with lower tempos, the defenses are just so bad that the games wind up going over the total. Well, here you do get some teams that love to run the floor, but not all that efficient offensively. And there are also some bad defenses here in this league, too. Don't get me wrong. But, that's the important thing. That's why just going based off of tempo, it's not good enough. And I think that, as we talked about on Friday, and as we had a listener question about this, some resources and things you're looking at for betting totals, I think a lot of times the books are posting these numbers based on tempo. They're not looking enough at tempo relative to efficiency to see if teams are going to maximize that higher number of possessions, or minimize that lower number of possessions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, if you're looking at totals and you want to know what to pay attention to, you want to pay attention to tempo first, but that can't be the only thing you do, because if a team's consistently playing a game at a pace of 72, 73 possessions, and yet they're going under the total every single time because they play good defense and poor offense, you got to adjust something. You have to know that while you can sit there and say, man, if you play a 73 possession game, you should get over 142 points or whatever it is. But if it's happening consistently, you got to pay attention. And I think that efficiency on offense and defense is, something that's fairly easy to track on both KenPom and Torvik's site. I have to say I like Torvik's site as far as the charts for, recency and seeing, what way are they going. You can check out those graphs to see what they were earlier this season, what they are in conference play. Also, you can look at the splits on home and away. So I would suggest doing things like that because there can be some pretty decent differences for teams as far as efficiency both on offense and defense, whether it comes to being at home or on the road. There's also some teams that play faster when they're at home or on the road. So if you want to look at that, you know, by this point we've got a pretty big sample size to check that out. Basically what you're trying to do when you bet totals is you're trying to see what kind of pace you think the game's going to be played at. That's the first thing you got to figure out. Second thing is how much points per possession do you expect each team to get? You know, and that's how you get to the total, because then you can just multiply it out by possession and figure out what you think the total will be. So that's certainly something I think everybody should pay attention to.
Yeah, I think Torvik is such a great resource. I mean, first of all, it's free, which, you know, I mean, obviously not that KenPom is expensive or anything like that. I think it's a very valuable resource to pay for. You know, but Torvik does some different things, has the charts, as you mentioned. You know, it's such a user-friendly site in terms of, right now I'm looking at the Horizon League page for the full season, shows the adjusted efficiencies, effective field goal offense and defense, so on and so forth. You click a checkbox, and then it shows you conference only. It's just such an easy resource to use in a lot of different ways. You know, he's got the game breakdowns, you know, like, much like the fan match that KenPom has. You know, a great, very easy-to-use resource, and also I think a resource that maybe isn't as oversaturated as KenPom. I think the books rely so much on KenPom that, you know, while Torvik's not off by a lot on a lot of these games from, you know, the fan match or the, as he calls it, funalytics standpoint, still I think there are, you know, some additional edges from looking at something that, you know, doesn't have as much of a mainstream, you know, I guess, you know, a mainstream appeal even.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the best point of all of them is that, you know, at this point the books are just using KenPom widely. So when you see them open numbers, they're almost always right on KP's number, really close to it. So it's good to pay attention to a site like Bart Torvik's because, you know, where there's differences from KenPom, I think you should pay attention. I will say one thing that I've noticed, you know, I pay really close attention to totals, and I'll try not to go on too long of a diatribe here, but it's one of those things where certainly this is my expertise and where I pay the most attention in totals. My long-term track record in totals in college basketball is very good. You know, I think that KenPom kind of smooths out the numbers a little bit. When you get these low unders, he doesn't like those as much as Torvik does. When you get the high overs, he doesn't like them as much as Torvik does. So something about the formula that he uses makes it to where you know, you're not going to see the 170 as often as far as a projection. When you see a total of, you know, 166, you know, KenPom's going to have 165 and Torvik's going to have 170, and you pretty much know that ahead of time. So then you just have to kind of go in there and see, you know, what the differences are between those two sites as far as, you know, what the possessions look like as far as tempo, efficiency, things like that, to see which one you kind of agree with. And in some ways you could say that it can create some opportunities if you think KenPom's off, because, I mean, that's what the books are using anyways.
All right, so as we get back and circle back to the Horizon League here, how do you rank these teams? I mean, how do you sort of put together, you know, your for lack of a better term, power rankings for the Horizon League? Who stands out? Who's kind of in that second tier, and then who's at the bottom?
Yeah, I'll just kind of roll through these here. Northern Kentucky, I've been really impressed at how well this team has played this year. I know they lost yesterday, but this team lost a lot from last season. This Northern Kentucky team's been very well coached. Drew McDonald's the best player in this conference, probably not very close either. So it certainly helps to have him. He's a senior, so we'll see how they do after he's gone. I'll take Wright State second. They're the slowest paced team in the league, so you get some pace wars when Wright State's playing against teams like, you know, Green Bay or UIC or something like that. Wright State plays some pretty good defense. I think they're a well-coached team as well. They're a tough matchup here. IUPUI, an experienced team that is very good on the glass. You know, when I was looking at these teams yesterday, making some notes here for the show, IUPUI really stood out as a very good rebounding team. And you know, we just talked about how important it is overall in the Horizon League. It's proven to be very important as well. So IUPUI has really moved up the rankings here. UIC, fast-paced, very good defense. They're first in the league in defensive efficiency, or at least yesterday they were. I haven't looked at it today. But UIC, very good defensive efficiency. Oakland after that. You know what I wanted to say about Oakland is they're not running near as much as they usually have. This was a team that usually is, top 50 in the country in tempo. They're very efficient on offense, though, and they're weak on defense. I think it's tough to bet totals on this team because they're going to play slowly, but they're not going to play much defense, and they're very good on offense. So Oakland, a different team than they've been in the past. Green Bay, really, really fast-paced. I mean, they really get up and down the court, but they're not very efficient. So keep an eye on them as you go forward. You're going to see a ton of really high totals. I'm still cautious of taking overs with them because they're just not that good on offense. Detroit, freshman Antoine Davis is a star. Watch out for him in the future. This guy's going to be really, really good. This is a team that right now isn't great, but I think they'll be quite a bit better in the future as long as Davis stays there. You almost wonder if a player of his stature will stay in the Horizon League, but I have to say, as a fan, I always like it when a player who's really good stays in that same league and just kind of dominates rather than switching around to different conferences. So we'll see what happens there, but he's a very good player. At the bottom of the league, Youngstown State, not a very good team. They haven't proven much. Milwaukee seems to be on a downward path here this season. And in Cleveland State, they're worse on offense and on defense as far as efficiency and league play, and they're clearly the worst team in this league.
It's kind of interesting when you look at IUPUI, 14-10 on the year, 6-5 in conference play. I mean, not only are they doing a really good job on the glass, but also they're top 100 in turnover percentage on defense. So this is a team that should be creating a lot more extra possessions, for themselves over the course of the season with offensive rebounds, not giving up offensive rebounds, and then forcing turnovers. And they're still kind of a marginal type of team right there in the middle. So, maybe that's a team that does. Maybe that's a follow team. As we talk about fade and follow teams on every segment, maybe that's one that could sort of be on the uptick here soon.
Yeah, and the other thing about a team like them is, like you said, they fit several of the different things that we've talked about. The fact that they're able to force some turnovers, get a lot of extra chances on offense, they get to the free throw line at a pretty high rate as well. These are all things that tend to help you cover spreads and win close games. So IUPUI, a team to watch going forward. Like I said, they don't have many new guys. They have quite a bit of experience. So certainly a team that is on the upswing in this league.
Now, as we look at situational spots here for the Horizon League, as you mentioned, a lot of these teams pretty closely packed together. I mean, I don't know what the athletic budgets look like to, fly around to some of these different places and all that. But, are there any difficult scheduling spots you do try to look at?
I would imagine they're probably driving, but I mean, it's still not a really far travel, and they usually are not put in too bad a spot. Some of these other conferences put them in really bad spots. Haven't seen too many in the Horizon League, to be honest with you. When I do the Situational Spots article, this is not a league that comes up very often. I do think that Detroit and Oakland have such a big rivalry with each other that around those games that they play against each other, I would look to go against those teams because it could either be a look-ahead spot or a letdown spot or hangover effect after a game like that, because that game means so much to both teams because of their close proximity to each other that I think that I would look to go against them. They do play again later this year. I'd look to go against them, especially in the game right before that or right after it. I would say probably right after it's probably an even better spot. But, other than that, I think this is a tight conference, tough to find some hard spots.
All right, so we move away from the Horizon League here. We look at our regression candidates for this Monday edition of Handicapping the Hardwood. We start on the negative side, and this is a team that was in a very interesting game over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't heard about Virginia Tech's game on Saturday, I assume you haven't really been paying attention to college basketball. And maybe this is the first show you've listened to for college basketball and Handicapping the Hardwood because you've been into football or something like that. If it is, then glad you're listening in today. But, this is a Virginia Tech team that won 47-24 over NC State this past weekend. Gosh, I mean, the first half total in that game was 71.5, and the game finishes at 71. The full game stays under the first half total. I don't think I've ever seen that. I'm not saying it's never happened, but I don't remember seeing it. So, crazy game. Virginia Tech couldn't do anything offensively, and yet they still win by 23 points. I think Virginia Tech's defense is due for some negative regression here. They're 16th in defensive efficiency so far this year. They were really helped in large part through that NC State game. They played the 324th toughest slate of non-conference schedule. I mean, this is a team that really didn't test itself in the non-conference portion of the schedule. I think their defense has improved, but not by this much. They were 70th in defensive efficiency last year. You're going to play some good offenses here going forward. Makes me wonder if there's going to be some overvalue on them, though. I have to say I'm a little bit curious as to how their offense is going to perform, especially if Robinson doesn't come back. That's a key injury for them. So keep an eye on the injury reports here as well. I think that when he gets back and is healthy, I think there could be some overvalue for Virginia Tech.
That game played to 53 possessions on Saturday. 0.453 points per possession for North Carolina State in that game. I've never seen it. I'm thinking about it. I'm like, is college football back? Because that looks like a college football score.
Right.
But I definitely agree with you with Virginia Tech. This is a team that, as you mentioned, those outliers. You try to play on those outliers. And right now, their defense does have some outliers. The game against Syracuse as well, where they defended very, very well back on January 26th. Maybe a chance to play some overs, a chance to fade this team a little bit. And that chance is out there potentially tonight as they host Louisville. Any lean on that game for you?
I think my lean there would be on Louisville based on, bouncing back from their loss to North Carolina. And, it depends on if Robinson's going to play here for Virginia Tech. I'm kind of looking here down the screen. Doesn't look like he'll play tonight. So, Justin Robinson's a really big key to Virginia Tech. I think, it's hard to lay points with Virginia Tech without him. Not everybody's going to score 24 points. So, my lean would be against Virginia Tech in that game. But I think it's hard to play the over, too, if you don't have your floor general. So maybe a longer-term thing looking forward as long as Robinson can come back fairly soon.
All right, let's go. I think about as far under the radar as we've ever gone here on Handicapping the Hardwood. And people that are regular listeners of the show know we love small conferences. I think this is the deepest dive we've ever done for a talking point here. Your positive regression team, it made me smile this morning when I saw it.
I figured you'd like this one. I really did. North Alabama, their offense. This is definitely the most under the radar we've ever gone. I like that there's lines on these ASUN games, other small leagues, Patriot leagues, things like that, because it's also going to help me know these teams better when we go to conference tournament time to talk about, hey, who's going to have some value from a future standpoint? What can we expect from this tournament? So, I know these teams better than I did in the past because, they do have a line on these games. North Alabama has faced the 61st toughest slate of defenses so far this year. Now, I really shouldn't have to tell you that the Atlantic Sun is not going to have very many teams that are that good in defense. Teams left on their schedule aren't even close to that good defensively. North Alabama not playing very slowly. I think their offense is better than what they've shown so far. I wouldn't take an over with them, say, against a Liberty or something like that where they're really good at controlling the tempo. But I think in some of these games coming up, North Alabama could go over the total here based on the fact that, their percentages on the offensive end are worse than what they should be because they've played so many good defenses, and they're about to play some weak defenses here going forward.
Yeah, they just scored 80 points against Lipscomb over the weekend. So, some signs in the right direction for them because Lipscomb, a top 25 defensive team in adjusted efficiency, according to Bart Torvik, and they got 80 points on them. Now, granted, the game was played to 77 possessions, but still, not a bad showing there for them, 1.044 points per possession. Pretty good for a team that ranks 329th in adjusted offensive efficiency. And again, this is another one of those very important reminders for you that, as you're looking at a team like North Alabama, or really any team for that matter, the adjusted offensive and defensive efficiency metrics are based on playing an average Division I team. So A lot of times you're not going to play an average Division I team, certainly not for North Alabama the rest of the way. So that's a very important distinction to make here when it comes to those adjusted metrics at both KenPom and Torvik.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important point. And in the ASUN, you're not going to play the average team very often at all. So, when you get way under the radar and you see a team that's played this tough of a group of defenses, that's something to keep in mind. They're not going to face an average team very often. They're going to be facing the 250th ranked defense or the 300th ranked defense on a pretty consistent basis as we go forward.
All right, so we transition from the regression candidates to our follow and fade segment. I guess, we'll go ahead and start with the follow team here today.
Yeah, the Marshall Thundering Herd, I think this team's better than their 7-15-1 ATS record looks. Marshall's been put in some bad spots thanks to Conference USA's confusing, I'll say it as nice as I can, confusing schedule here. This team's really very good offensively still, and I'm wondering how low the books are going to get on them. I think Marshall's pace of play and the way they play still can be a tough matchup for some teams, and I think this 7-15-1 ATS record will probably give us some value backing them down the stretch. They do have a great leader in Elmore. I think this Marshall team is still better than this ATS record looks, and as long as they aren't in terrible spots, I'd like to back them going forward.
All right, so we look at the other side of the coin here, a team with a good ATS record. This is a fade team from one of the bigger conferences we've discussed so far on the show.
Yeah, Marquette. I think I like this one even more, to be honest with you. They've had a ton of second-half comebacks this year. That can really take a lot out of you. If you've played any kind of athletics in the past, you've been in any kind of competitive sports to where you're consistently coming from behind and winning just barely at the end. I mean, it feels great, but it takes a lot out of you. They're also a team that's really reliant on jump shooting. They're good at it, but you and I both know that you're not always going to be making those threes. Howard makes these threes a lot more often than most guys do, but, he's going to have a lot of tough shots, and the rest of the guys on the team aren't likely to keep shooting the percentages they've been shooting in some of these games either. This is a good team, a good Marquette team. I'm certainly not saying they're a bad team, but they're 15-7 ATS, and I think they're going to be laying too many points here coming up.
Yeah, and you look at Howard here this year. He's played 80.4% of the minutes so far for Marquette, 79.7% of the minutes in conference play, and then in top 50 games, 86.4% of the minutes, pulling all these numbers from Torvik. Obviously, those are all collegiate career highs for him. He's a 5'11 guy trying to do everything for this team. 35.3% usage rate overall, almost 39% in conference play. I mean, this isn't exactly setting up like a Trae Young at Oklahoma kind of asked at the end of the year. I know he was a freshman, so it's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison, but you do have to wonder for Marcus Howard here how long he can actually keep this up, if he finds a second wind or if he just kind of hits that wall late in the year.
Sure, yeah. I mean, he's a good player, and we're definitely not saying he's not a good player. He's done a tremendous job, and I think he'll be very good going forward. But there's a lot on his shoulders. He's taking a lot of tough shots, has totally carried this team in several of these comebacks. So, we'll see if he can keep doing that on a game-to-game basis.
All right, so let's break down some games here for this week, and we'll start with a big game. Again, we've been talking a lot of smaller conference-type stuff here on today's show, but a big game tomorrow night in Manhattan, Kansas, on the road at Kansas State. What are you seeing for this one here, Kyle?
Well, the first thing I'll start out with here is I had Kansas State and Oklahoma State under the total this past weekend, a really, really frustrating game. I sat and watched that game, watched them run down the clock every single possession, a very, very slow-paced game, and then just bomb in a three every single time. It is getting really, really old. 27 made threes out of 49 attempts from two teams that aren't very good shooting. Dean Wade was 9 for 9 in that game for 24 points. Wade makes a huge difference to this Kansas State team. Now, when you play that slow of a paced game, that was the slowest paced game for both teams. It was Oklahoma State's slowest paced game by more than 3 possessions. So, really slow paced game. That one should have been an under as long as they didn't shoot a ridiculous percentage. But, in this kind of game, is Kansas State going to be able to slow it down to the type of possessions they want it to be? I don't think they want to play on Kansas's terms here. Kansas is a team that plays solid defense as well. They're 13th in defensive efficiency according to KenPom. Kansas State is, I believe, fifth. So Kansas State fifth, Kansas 13th, but Kansas is 25th on offense, and Kansas State's 178. So, that was this past Saturday when they put up that kind of point total and put up 1.29 points per possession. It's not been the norm for Kansas State. I think Kansas State's going to have to be good enough on offense here because Kansas has been able to score against just about everybody. I don't think this is going to be a 50-49 type game. So, Kansas State has to find a way to put up enough here. I think the total here will be pretty low, probably 120, top 128, 129, somewhere in there. To me, this is just such a massive game for both teams. If you look at the Big 12 standings, you've got Baylor tied at the top with Kansas State. I can't imagine anybody who predicted Baylor would be tied for the top there. Kansas State tied for the top despite missing Dean Wade for quite a while. Kansas only 6-3, so half a game back. Everybody's talking about, will this be the year that Kansas doesn't, win the Big 12? I mean, everybody says that almost every year. Kansas isn't that great of a team this year. I think that certainly there's an opportunity for other teams to win it, but I mean, this is a big type of game that's going to decide the Big 12. I think Kansas is not a team that I would want to count out in the Big 12, I guess the way I'm trying to say it. But, Kansas State, they have a real opportunity here. They've got to win this game at home. Huge game for Kansas State. I think this game means even more to Kansas State than it does to Kansas.
So as you look at Kansas here in Big 12 play, 5th in adjusted offensive efficiency, 4th in adjusted defensive efficiency, just looking at the conference play statistics. What is wrong with Kansas? I mean, we don't think of Kansas as being, a statistical middle-of-the-pack team in the Big 12. What is their issue right now?
I'd say they have two biggest issues. Well, three if you count free throw shooting, and they've struggled badly from the free throw line. They've turned it over a lot more than you would think a Kansas team would turn it over, especially in Big 12 play. 19.6% of possessions turnovers, not terrible, but certainly not good. And then the second one that really stands out to me, offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds. They're 7th in offensive rebounding percentage and 8th in defensive rebound percentage. So they're getting beat on the boards pretty consistently. And, I've already said what I think about rebounding and how important it is in college basketball today. So I think that's one of their biggest problems right there.
And they really miss Azubuike. I mean, they miss him a ton, especially on the glass here. That's been a big problem for Kansas here this season. And, they have, I believe it's D'Souza, who's also suspended, which is insane. But, that is Kansas, right? I'm not mistaken in saying that, am I?
No, and there's been a lot of talk about that one, the NCAA and how this is going to go with Silvio D'Souza. Kansas is definitely shorthanded. So, if Kansas wins the Big 12 again this year, you have to wonder when somebody else is going to win the Big 12, because this is certainly everybody else's shot.
All right, so we move on from that game here. We'll stay in the major conferences, though. Let's go out to the SEC here for another game on Tuesday night. Florida takes on Auburn. What are you looking at from this game, Kyle?
Well, Florida keeps underachieving in a big way. Are they ever going to win one of these big games? Florida should be better than they are. At this point, the Gators have to be considered a bubble team at best. They're great on defense, really bad on offense. I remember, some of these games recently, Kentucky game, most recent, Florida's had some pretty big leads in the second half and has found a way to lose those games. So they haven't been able to finish games. This is an opportunity for them. Auburn hasn't been that good this year. I think Auburn's certainly a good team, but Auburn has been, a little bit underwhelming themselves. They certainly played better the last couple games, home against Missouri and then home against Alabama. They have another home game here. I think Florida is better than what they've shown. I still think that they will likely make the NCAA tournament, and they'll pick off a big win here somewhere. But, this team is consistently underachieving, and at this point, like I said, they're at best on the bubble. If they're going to finish something like 17-14 or 18-13, they're definitely going to be a bubble team. So we'll see what Florida does going forward. I think that, the key to this game is who's going to get the tempo where they want it. Auburn wants to run, certainly 37th in average possession length on offense. Florida's a team that slows the game down pretty consistently. They play really good man defense, 340th in tempo overall. So if this game's really high scoring, it certainly plays to Auburn's liking. If it's a lower scoring game, I think that gives Florida a chance.
So which way do you think it'll go? Do you think that Auburn will be able to dictate the tempo here? Or do you think that Florida, goes on the road and has some success with it?
I wouldn't say I have a really strong opinion on this game. I would probably lean to the under if I had to take something in this game. But to be honest with you, I really don't like taking Auburn unders. Same time, I really don't like taking Florida overs. So I think that this game will be, probably a little bit closer than the point spread would suggest. I think maybe if the spread's 8 points or something like that, I would lean toward taking Florida in this game. They probably make the game get a little bit more sloppy and keep it close. I do think Auburn will probably win, though.
All right, so we do like to talk about potential premium plays here on our Handicapping the Hardwood segments. And, of course, maybe not surprisingly, we go to one of the smaller conferences here for that one, a conference we've talked about a fair amount here recently, the Big West, for Wednesday night's matchup between Cal State Fullerton and UC Irvine.
Yeah, Fullerton is much improved here of late. We talked about Fullerton as a follow team there a couple of weeks ago. They've certainly played much better here of late. UC Irvine, the best team in this conference throughout the course of the season. They're 7-1 so far this year. Fullerton's 5-2, though. Fullerton played a really, really tough non-conference, the 12th toughest slate of non-conference teams. This is a really, really improved Fullerton team, I guess I would say. They were never as bad as their record. And UC Irvine is a quality team, but how many points are they going to be laying here? If you can get 7.5, 8 points here with Fullerton, I have to like Fullerton here. Irvine went to Fullerton earlier this year and just absolutely killed them. The final score was 63-46, but that really doesn't do it justice. It was 55-23 with 10 minutes left in that game. So Irvine definitely shut it off there at the end of the game. Fullerton beat the 23-8 the rest of the way. This Fullerton team has to be upset about the way that first game went. And if you look back at last year, Fullerton beat Irvine in the Big West Conference Tournament Championship to get to the big dance. I think Irvine was a really motivated team in that first game. Fullerton should be very motivated in a game like this now because they got absolutely embarrassed on their home court. I talk about road revenge and how much it means. There's certainly some road revenge in this game. I like Fullerton in this game. I think if you can get 7.5, 8 points, 8.5, somewhere in that range, I like Fullerton because it projects as a fairly low-scoring game. Irvine doesn't blow teams out too often because they slow things down, win with defense. I think Fullerton has to be upset about the way that first game went, and I definitely like Fullerton in this game.
All right, one more game to talk about here on this edition of Handicapping the Hardwood. This one here, another one on Wednesday night. Big game in the SEC. LSU, Mississippi State. Looks like this should be a pretty high-scoring shootout.
Yeah, definitely. LSU, very efficient on offense, plays pretty quickly, 52nd in tempo in the country. Mississippi State, middle of the road in tempo, but they're 20th best in offensive efficiency. Mississippi State gets a lot of second chance points as well, and so does LSU. So you expect that even if they miss the first shot, they're going to get quite a few chances at a second crack at it. You've got two teams who are efficient, both shoot the ball really well from the free throw line. To me, the question here is how does LSU respond after that home loss to Arkansas? I think this game's going to tell us quite a bit about LSU. And from the other side, Mississippi State just got revenge on Mississippi, and they went on the road and beat Mississippi after they'd lost at home. So, you could say that both teams are in an interesting spot here because Mississippi State has played some tough games here recently. They played at Kentucky, home against Auburn, at Alabama, which was a close game, and then at Mississippi. And now they play LSU, and then you've got LSU who is rolling along, playing well. They've won a couple games in overtime, certainly, but they came back and won against Arkansas and Missouri. And Missouri comeback was pretty ridiculous. But now you get a game that should project out as a close game the whole way. I don't know if I want to bet this game, but I want to watch this game and pay attention to who shows up in this game. Can Mississippi State put in another strong effort after putting a lot into that game against Mississippi? Can LSU bounce back from a tough loss where they made a big comeback, had a chance to win that game, couldn't do it? You know, I think this tells us a lot about both of these teams going forward because the SEC is an improved league. I want to see what these two teams do as far as what they're made of. I think that this game will tell us a lot about both teams.
Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com, also daily contributor to BangTheBook.com, and his situational article for this week already posted over there as well. What's going on over at Hunter Sports Picks right now, Kyle?
Well, sign up for the Free Picks newsletter if you haven't already. I wanted to kind of tease that there's going to be a special offer coming out this week. I can't say what it is yet, but very cheap price on college basketball. That will be sent out first to newsletter subscribers, so you can sign up for that at huntersportspicks.com. We'll get you a special offer here later this week as kind of a post-Super Bowl offer coming up. And, you know, if you haven't already signed up for that newsletter, go ahead and do that for the free picks and for offers like that. Also, if you haven't been checking out the videos at BangTheBook.com, you know, you can go to YouTube, search Bang the Book. Got daily videos there from Adam, and then I'm doing a couple there per week. Wednesday, looking at the sharp money, seeing who the sharps like for that particular day, both college basketball and the NBA. And then on Fridays, breaking down the Saturday slate. So if you haven't already known that that's going on over there at YouTube, you can subscribe to Bang the Book. Some pretty good information on a daily basis there.
And, of course, you can follow Kyle's work on Twitter at Kyle Hunter Picks. Kyle, appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much, brother, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
All right, thanks.